In closing my reflections this evening, I've got two short reflections and stories to tell. One's about how we overcome the act of genocide, and the other is about how we act and speak in the world today. My first little story is going to probably not seem like it's anything to do with racism at all, or even Holocaust education at all. But it's something that touched me very deeply a few weeks ago, and perhaps helped me to draw some of the conclusions I've drawn this evening about why we need to give testimony, why we need to remember, and what our duty is for the future together. Leon ambled into my office. His stepdaughter actually, was a student at the University of Southern California. The Shoah Foundation Institute, the 52,000 testimonies collected by Steven Spielberg, are now installed at the University of Southern California, where we work on a daily basis in terms of preserving that archive, but also teaching from it. We not only collect survivor testimonies from the Holocaust, we also collect testimonies from Rwanda and Bosnia and Cambodia and other places too, even Armenia. And Leon wandered into the institute, and he sat down and he told me that he thought that his parents were in the archive, which means he actually knew that we were in the archive. So we looked them up, and there they were, and we started to look at them for a little while, and he was very moved because both his parents had passed away, and he hadn't looked at the testimony before, and they hadn't really talked about their experience before. So for him it was a kind of a way just to sort of maybe see what was there and see if he had the courage to watch it one day. And in the archive there are many photographs. He was amazed to see all these people that he didn't know even existed because no one talked about them because of the situation. And then there was a picture of his mother who was kneeling on a grassy area with a plaque in front of her. And his wife said to him, "Oh, what's that, Leon?" He said, "That's my mother. She's at the grave of her daughter." And his wife said to him, "You have a sister?" To which he said, "Well, yeah, my parents had a baby before the war and she didn't make it. So, we don't really mention her very much." And then to my surprise, I said to him, "Leon, what was her name?" He said, "Well, it's Rachel." Names. Her name was in the archive. I said, "Well, let's have a look." We clicked on the name, and there she was, her parents talking about her. And for the first time, he heard his mother describing what had happened on the day when they were in a selection in the Vilnius ghetto. Some of the people were being taken away to work in a work commando. She had her baby, but she was there with her mother and her mother-in-law. Her mother said, "Give me the baby, you go work, you have a chance to live." Her mother-in-law said, "No, you come with us, we need you, and so does the baby." And so she stood with these two women in front of her, giving her absolutely opposite advice as to what to do. Her mother said, "Go," and she pushed her, and took the baby and walked the other way. And she describes how that was the beginning of the end of my life because I could never forgive myself for that moment. As I stood and watched Leon there, suddenly I saw what was happening. We were unmuting the scream of that family's experience just in that room right there. But Leon was unmuting his own inability to be able to talk about that. And we found Rachel and we gave her her name back. And her family had her name again. And Leon turned around and said, "Because of what I've seen, I want to help with the education of young people for the future because this should not have happened to my family. And I don't want it to happen to anybody else's family either." And so the link was made in that moment of memory and unmuting between the past and the present. And Leon found his voice. And so the voice is about the past, but the voice is also about the future. We started this evening with Anton quoting Martin Niemöller, and there was no one left to speak to me for me. There's no one left to speak. There's no one to speak today for the Rohingya. They're a small group of people. 1.6 million of them live in Burma. If we'd have gone to the streets of Berlin in 1935 and we'd talked to the Jews just after the Nuremberg laws about what was happening to them, they would have been able to tell us in precise detail what was happening to them. They understood about the hatred of the Nazis. They understood about the legalization of hatred in their lives. They knew what the citizenship laws meant. They knew what it meant to lose their jobs, because that had happened 2 years previously. They knew what it meant to be excluded from the community, but nobody was listening to the Jews of Europe because they all had their own opinions about what was going on in Nazi Germany. So the victims themselves are the most disempowered group at the point at which they need to speak most. So we need to give voice to the people that are voiceless. The Rohingya cannot speak for themselves because there is no one to listen, so there is no channel. I mention them simply because they're not the only persecuted group on this earth. But if they had a voice, that is, if we had ears to listen to their voice, they would be able to tell us what they were experiencing, and there's no doubt we would want to help. We may not succeed, but the point is not whether we succeed or not, but whether we try. My final very brief story, and I'm going to try and keep this as brief as possible, because it's a long story that covers most of the century, but I'm going to hop, skip, and jump through it, because it answers partly Martin Niemöller's request. 1915, in the Armenian desert, there was a young man who was in the German armed forces. He was in the medical corps. The order went out that there was no photography allowed, and so he took out his camera and he photographed what he could see, the genocide of the Armenians. He was sent back to Germany. He was court-martialed. He was dismissed, but he took the rolls of film with him back to Berlin, and he printed them. Mid-1920s, 24, a young novelist is in the Ukraine. He's concerned about the totalitarian regime that's emerged in the Soviet Union. He thinks it poses a threat to human life. He goes and he starts to interview people and find out what's happening, and he travels through the Soviet Union. He writes a novel called 5 Fingers Over You, and he basically predicts the Stalinist totalitarian purges that were forthcoming in his novel before it happened. 1933, 1st of April, the first anti-Jewish boycott in Berlin. No, in Berlin, in Germany, right across Germany. He's in Berlin, the journalist. He sees what happens to the Jews that day, and he sits down and he writes a letter, 5 pages of beautiful prose, that basically says, what you did to the Jews of Germany today, you did to me as a German. And I, and everybody else who is open-minded and free-thinking, we will oppose you, and we will stop you. Otherwise, you will not only destroy the Jews of Germany, you will bring shame upon our nation for generations to come, forever. He sends his letter to the press as an open letter to Adolf Hitler, and a few days later finds himself as one of the first inmates of Dachau concentration camp. So I was on the Avenue of the Righteous at Yad Vashem, and been learning about the righteous among the nations, and very moved by and inspired by these amazing people. And learned that all of the righteous among the nations, the criteria is that you have to have saved at least one Jewish person at the risk of your own life. All of them had saved one Jewish person except for one. So by and by, I was in the Armenian quarter in the room where there's a description of the Armenian genocide, and I noticed that all the photographs are taken by the same person, A. Wegener, A. Wegener, A. Wegener, A. Wegener, all the way around the room. So I turned to my colleague and I said, that's not Armin Wegener, is it? She says, it is. Armin Wegener, who saw what was happening to the Armenians and photographed what he saw and was involved in the civil trials to bring justice for the Armenians in the 1920s. Armin Wegener, who wrote the book 5 Fingers Over You, predicting what was going to happen in the Soviet Union. Armin Wegener, the only person to have sat down and written a letter to the Chancellor of the Weimar Republic, Adolf Hitler, and said, not in my name. Why was he given righteous among the nations, although he never saved a Jewish person? He's the only known person to have put his pen to paper and complained formally and openly about what happened in Germany that day. There were 60 million Germans who could have done that, and only one did. So Pastor Martin Niemöller was right, but there was a voice. Armin Wegener failed, then failed again, then failed again. But the reason he is my hero is that he never stopped using his voice. Thank you.